He was a titan, a whisper in the silent wood-paneled boardrooms where the fates of nations were decided. Kenjiro Takahashi, at 72, was the architect of a global empire built on technology, logistics, and real estate. A fortune so vast it behaved less like money and more like a law of physics. His personal worth, a staggering $40 billion, was a number that had lost all tangible meaning. Yet the man himself was being hollowed out, eroded from the inside by the very success that defined him. His penthouse, occupying the entire 95th floor of the Takahashi Tower in Chicago, was a glass-walled kingdom in the clouds. But it was also a gilded cage, a silent mausoleum for his memories. He was a widower, and the silence left by his wife, Hana, was a roar that all the money in the world could not quiet. Once a quarter, in whatever metropolis he found himself, Kenjiro performed a ritual. He would shed the armor of his identity, the $1,000 bespoke suits, the Patek Philippe watch that chimed with the quiet confidence of old money, and don the clothes of a ghost. Sometimes it was the frayed uniform of a long-forgotten maintenance man from a company he'd acquired and dissolved decades ago. Today, it was a simple, threadbare suit of a funereal grey, purchased from a Salvation Army for $12. It smelled of mothballs and the faint, lingering despair of its previous owner. He called them his walks of transparency. He believed that as Kenjiro Takahashi, the billionaire, he was a concept, a walking balance sheet to be flattered, feared, or petitioned. But as Kenji, the weary old man on the street, he became something else, entirely. Invisible. And in that invisibility, he could see the world as it truly was. This walk, however, was different. It was a pilgrimage. He was on the verge of signing the documents that would create the Hana Takahashi Foundation, a $2 billion philanthropic endeavor dedicated to creating public spaces of beauty and tranquility in urban jungles. It was a monument to his wife, a woman who believed that beauty, like kindness, was a fundamental human need. But a corrosive doubt had taken root in his heart. Was he planting a magnificent garden in soil that had turned to poison? He had to know if the world Hana had so fiercely believed in, a world of small decencies and quiet compassion, still existed. He adjusted the collar of the cheap polyester suit. Before leaving, he fastened a small, discreet pin to the lapel. It was not a brand or a club insignia. It was a small, exquisitely detailed camellia blossom, hand-wrought from oxidized silver. A tsubaki. Hana had crafted it herself in a metalworking class decades ago. It was his most priceless possession. He took the private service elevator down to the sub-basement, bypassing the waiting, silent Rolls-Royce, and slipped out a service door into the raw, clamorous embrace of a Chicago afternoon. For hours he drifted through the city's canyons of steel and glass. He watched a young man in a suit, Marcus Thorne, berate a hot dog vendor, his voice dripping with condescension because the man was slow to make change. He watched Thorne's companion, a woman named Isabella, whose beauty was as sharp and cold as ice, laugh as their Uber splashed a sheet of grimy water onto an elderly woman waiting for a bus. A profound coldness seeped into Kenjiro's bones. The city was a magnificent, glittering machine, but he feared its heart had been stripped out and sold for parts. He felt a weariness that was more than physical. It was a spiritual exhaustion, and then something else, a sudden, terrifying vertigo. The world swam, the hard edges of the skyscrapers softening into a nauseating blur, a crushing pressure like an iron fist clenched around his chest. He gasped for air, his vision tunneling. Not here, he thought, a surge of pure panic overriding his stoicism. Not like this. He recognized the symptoms his cardiologist had warned him about: a transient ischemic attack, a TIA, a polite clinical term for the brain being starved of oxygen. A final warning shot. He fumbled in the pocket of his cheap trousers for the small vial of nitroglycerin pills, his lifeline. His fingers, suddenly thick and useless as sausages, couldn't find their purchase on the tiny cap. The vial slipped, bounced once on the grimy concrete with a sound that seemed impossibly loud, and skittered directly into the dark maw of a storm drain. A new, more primal terror gripped him. He staggered, leaning against the cold, polished marble facade of a luxury apartment building, the Ethelgard, and slid down into a sitting position on the sidewalk. His cheap tie was askew. His face, he knew, must be a ghastly, sweating mask of fear. He was Kenjiro Takahashi. He was worth $40 billion, and he was dying, alone and invisible, on a stretch of concrete on the Magnificent Mile. The world had shrunk to a cacophony of distorted sounds and blurry lights. Kenjiro Takahashi, a man whose quietest murmur could shake global markets, was now just a heap of urban refuse. He tried to call for help, to form the words. Help! Hospital! The sounds that emerged were a garbled, guttural slur, the sound of his own brain betraying him. Marcus Thorne, the real estate developer Kenjiro had observed earlier, was striding out of the Ethelgard's exclusive restaurant after a long, celebratory lunch. He was flush with success, barking into his phone about closing a deal. He saw the slumped figure of Kenjiro, and his path deviated by a foot, a subconscious automatic swerve to avoid contamination. Filth, Thorne muttered, not to anyone in particular, but to the universe that had dared place such an imperfection in his path. They should be clearing these people out. It's bad for property values. He didn't just ignore Kenjiro. He radiated a palpable wave of contempt, a physical manifestation of his disgust. Kenjiro watched him through a watery haze. He recognized the man's arrogant strut, the cruel set of his jaw. He also recognized him from a dozen business journals. Thorne was the head of a development group that had been aggressively lobbying Takahashi Industries for a partnership on a massive urban renewal project. The irony was a bitter pill. Kenjiro tried to raise a hand. Mr. Thorne. Thorne saw only a grimy hand reaching out, and he recoiled as if from a snake. "Get the hell away from me," he snapped, his voice a whip crack, before continuing his brisk walk down the street, the incident already purged from his memory. Minutes later, Isabella Thorne emerged, laughing into her own phone. She was flanked by another woman, both of them dressed in clothes that cost more than the average person's yearly rent. "Oh, darling, you won't believe the state of this city," Isabella said, her voice carrying on the crisp autumned air. She noticed Kenjiro and stopped. Her friend followed her gaze. "Oh, look at that," Isabella whispered, a note of venomous glee in her voice. "He's just given up." Right in front of the Ethelgard. The sheer nerve. She raised her phone, not to call for help, but to frame a picture. She angled it, capturing Kenjiro's slumped form with the gleaming brass letters of the building's name above him. "For the gram," she stage-whispered to her friend, adding a filter. Caption: "Urban decay. It's so gritty and authentic." "He's probably faking it for money," her friend added, pulling her cashmere wrap tighter around her shoulders. "They do that, you know. They pretend to have seizures. It's a trick." Kenjiro's vision was darkening, the sharp pain in his chest fading into a terrifying, spreading numbness. He heard their laughter, light and brittle like breaking glass. It was the sound of beautiful, hollow things. The final, most brutal indignity came from Gregory, the Ethelgard's doorman. Gregory was a man whose entire universe consisted of the 50 feet of pristine sidewalk in front of his building. He wore a heavy wool coat with gold epaulets and ruled his concrete fiefdom with the unblinking vigilance of a petty dictator. He had been watching Kenjiro with mounting irritation. This thing was a stain, a blight on the Ethelgard's impeccable reputation. Gregory marched over, his polished black shoes clicking on the pavement. He did not ask if the man was okay. He did not bend down. He nudged Kenjiro's shoulder with the hard toe of his shoe. "All right, Grandpa. Show's over. Move it along." Gregory barked, his voice accustomed to command. "This is private property. No loitering. On your feet." Kenjiro groaned, a low, animal sound of pain and despair. He tried to push himself up, but his limbs refused to obey. The world was a sickening carousel. "Sick." He managed to force the single word past his lips. Gregory sneered. "Yeah, sick. I'll bet. Sick of working for a living. I'm not asking you again. Get up." With a grunt of exertion, Gregory seized the collar of Kenjiro's cheap suit jacket. The worn fabric ripped with a sound like tearing paper. He half-dragged, half-pushed Kenjiro away from the building's gleaming facade, shoving him roughly into a recessed service entrance, a small alcove filled with overflowing trash cans. "Stay here and don't let me see you again," Gregory spat, wiping his white-gloved hands together as if he had just handled something unspeakably foul. Kenjiro collapsed onto a pile of damp cardboard boxes. The rough handling had exacerbated his condition. The world was fading to grey. He had built empires that reshaped skylines. He had commanded the respect of presidents and kings, and he was going to die in a filthy alley, murdered by indifference, his final moments an inconvenience to a man in a ridiculous costume. He thought of Hana. He thought of the camellia garden at their home in Kyoto. He closed his eyes, and the roar of the city, the cruel laughter, the sneering commands, all of it faded into a dull, distant hum. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone. 2 blocks away, in a world that felt a million miles from the cold glamour of the Magnificent Mile, Amelia Mia Evans was polishing a wine glass until it squeaked. She worked at the conservatory, the Ethelgard's less formal cafe and bistro, a place of frantic energy, clattering dishes, and the constant hiss of the espresso machine. It was where the assistants waited, where the shoppers rested their feet, a world away from the hushed, carpeted opulence of the main dining room. At 26, Mia felt as if she had been running on a treadmill her entire life, and the machine was winning. She was a woman of quiet, profound intelligence, currently being put to no good use. She had graduated top of her class with a degree in horticulture and landscape design, with a specialized focus on classical Japanese gardens. Her passion wasn't just for plants, it was for the philosophy behind them, the search for harmony, the beauty in asymmetry, the art of kintsugi, where broken pottery was mended with gold, making the cracks the most beautiful part of the piece. That philosophy felt like a distant, cruel joke now. Her own life was a shattered vessel with no gold in sight. Her mother, a vibrant, life-loving woman, had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 3 years ago. The disease was a thief, stealing memories, personality, and dignity, piece by agonizing piece. The cost of her care was a ravenous monster, devouring every dollar Mia and her father could earn. Mia, the promising landscape architect, the future designer of serene and beautiful spaces, had put her dreams on indefinite hold. She'd moved back into her childhood bedroom in their small suburban bungalow and taken 2 jobs. By day, she worked at a wholesale nursery, hauling bags of mulch and watering flats of petunias. 4 nights a week and all weekend, she was a waitress at the conservatory. She was tired in her bones, in her soul. Her body ached from the endless hours on her feet. Her mind ached from the relentless, mind-numbing repetition. Dressing on the side. No onions. Is this gluten-free? My water has no ice. She glanced at the clock. 4:30 p.m. Her shift was finally over. Her manager, a perpetually harried man named Carlos, jabbed a finger at the schedule. Don't forget you're on the double tomorrow, Mia. 10 a.m. start. Got it, Carlos. She untied her stained black apron, hung it on its hook, and grabbed her worn peacoat. Her earnings for the day, including tips, came to $96. Her mother's medication copay was $300 a week. The arithmetic of her life was a brutal, relentless equation that never balanced. She stepped out of the staff entrance, into the alleyway. The wind howled between the tall buildings, sharp and cold. She hated this city, hated its noise, its casual cruelty, its ability to make her feel so small and insignificant, a single ant in a sprawling, indifferent colony. She began the short walk to the bus stop, her head down, a learned posture of urban self-preservation. As she passed the service alcove for the main Ethelgard building, she saw something that made her pause. A pair of men's shoes. They were old and scuffed, but they weren't the tattered sneakers or broken boots she usually saw on the street. They were leather dress shoes, once of good quality, now utterly neglected. Her gaze travelled up. A man in a ripped grey suit was slumped against the brick wall, half hidden behind a dumpster. He was pale, a waxy, unnatural colour. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was a shallow, ragged whisper. Mia stopped. Her first instinct, the hardened shell of a cynical city dweller, screamed at her to keep walking. Don't get involved. He's drunk. He's high. It's not your problem. You have enough problems. She took 2 more steps toward the street. Kintsugi. The word surfaced in her mind, unbidden. The world breaks everyone. The beauty is in the mending. She let out a long, frustrated sigh, her breath a plume of white in the cold air. Damn it! She turned back. Mia approached the man cautiously. Sir? Sir, are you okay? There was no response, only a low, almost inaudible moan. She knelt, the icy dampness of the concrete seeping through the thin fabric of her work slacks. The alley reeked of stale beer and rotting garbage. But the man himself, he didn't smell of alcohol. He smelled of mothballs and, very faintly, of an expensive, long-faded cologne. Sir, can you hear me? She gently shook his shoulder. His eyelids fluttered open, but his eyes were unfocused, lost in some internal storm. Kenjiro's consciousness was a flickering candle flame. He was on the precipice of a full-blown stroke, his body's systems failing. He saw a shape, a blurry silhouette of a person kneeling over him, and a fresh wave of fear washed over him. Was it the doorman? Back to torment him further? No. Please, he whispered. The words were slurred, thick with an accent that wasn't from any part of America. It was the sound of a man's tongue, no longer obeying his will. I'm not going to hurt you, Mia said softly, her professional waitress voice replaced by something calmer, more human. You look very sick. I'm going to call for an ambulance. She pulled out her phone, its screen a spiderweb of cracks, the battery at a perilous 9%. Come on, stay with me, she murmured to the phone, as much as to the man. As she dialed 911, her eyes, trained by years of studying the minute details of leaf patterns and stone placements, scanned the man, searching for any piece of information. He was a mess, his suit ripped at the collar where Gregory had grabbed him. He looked like 1,000 other forgotten men. But Mia saw things others missed. She saw his hands. They were trembling and grimy from his fall, but they were not the hands of a man who had lived a life of manual labor or destitution. The nails were clean, immaculately manicured. And then she saw it. Pinned to the lapel of his cheap, torn jacket was a small piece of metal, tarnished with street filth. She reached out, and, with the pad of her thumb, wiped the grime away. It was a flower, a camellia. Not just any camellia, a tsubaki. The form was so precise, so artistically rendered. She had spent a semester studying the symbolism of plants in Japanese culture. The tsubaki represented humility, discretion, and perfection. It was a flower of the samurai class, a symbol of quiet nobility. Her grandfather, a W.T. vet who had served in the Pacific, had cultivated bonsai and had a deep love for Japanese art. He had a book filled with family mons, or crests, many of which featured stylized flowers. This pin felt significant. At that moment, the man's eyes fluttered open again, and for a split second, they focused on her. They were dark, filled with a terrifying combination of fear and a deep, ancestral weariness she recognized from photos of her own great-grandparents. He muttered something, a single word, repeated like a mantra. It was broken, slurred by his medical crisis, but she caught the sound of it. It was not English. It was Japanese. Hana! Hana! Mia's blood ran cold. Hana. In Japanese, it meant flower. She ended the 911 call. They would take too long. She looked at him, truly saw him for the first time. The manicured hands, the camellia pin, the Japanese word for flower on his lips. This was not a drunk. This was a man in profound, specific distress, lost and alone in a foreign land. She made a decision, born of pure, unhesitating empathy. She sprinted the 50 feet back to the conservatory's staff entrance, ignoring Carlos's shout as she burst back in. She grabbed a bottle of Fiji water from the service fridge and a clean, damp cloth from the busing station. "That's coming out of your tips!" Carlos yelled after her. She didn't hear him. She ran back to the alley and knelt beside the man again. "Sir, I have water." She opened it and held it to his lips. He managed a weak sip, coughing. His eyes, hazy with pain, focused on her. He was terrified, a stranger in a strange land, his body failing him, being treated like vermin. He looked at this young woman, at her worn-out coat and kind eyes, and his face, the face of a corporate titan, crumpled in utter despair. Mia saw the terror in his eyes. She saw the quiet nobility of the camellia pin. She saw a broken man. She put the water down. She took the clean, damp cloth and gently, respectfully, wiped the grime from his forehead and cheeks. And then, she did the one thing that would alter the course of dozens of lives. She bowed her head slightly. Not a deep, subservient bow, but a small, crisp inclination of respect from the neck. A gesture her grandfather had taught her was a sign of acknowledging another's humanity. She looked him directly in the eye, and in a clear, steady voice, she spoke to him. Not in English. "Anata no o hana wa totemo utsukushi desu," she said, her pronunciation careful and precise. "Your flower is very beautiful." She then switched to a more formal, concerned tone. "Daijoubu desu ka? Are you all right?" The effect was like a lightning strike. The fog of pain and confusion in Kenjiro Takahashi's eyes was instantly vaporized, replaced by a look of profound, earth-shattering shock. For the past hour, he had been an object, a piece of trash. He had been kicked, photographed, and verbally assaulted. He had resigned himself to dying alone, a forgotten man in a city that had rejected him. And now, this young woman with an exhausted face and a cheap coat was kneeling in the filth beside him, and she hadn't only seen his most precious possession, but she had also spoken to him. Not at him. To him. She had spoken the language of his childhood, the language of his beloved Hana. He stared at her as if she were an apparition. The world, which had been a grey, spinning vortex, suddenly snapped into sharp, brilliant focus. He saw her clearly now, the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the chipped nail polish on her fingers, the deep, genuine well of concern in her expression. You speak, he managed, the words still thick, but this time in his native Japanese. Yes, Mia replied, still in Japanese, her voice a gentle anchor in his storm. You are safe. I will get help. You are having a medical emergency. Can you tell me your name? Tears, hot and sudden, welled in Kenjiro's eyes. It wasn't just the language. It was the respect. It was the acknowledgement. In a world that had shown him only contempt, this one small act of seeing him, truly seeing him, was more potent than any medicine. It pulled him back from the abyss. He tried to answer. My name is Takahashi. Mr. Takahashi, Mia said, nodding. My name is Mia. Help is coming. Just try to breathe. You are not alone anymore. She was still holding the cloth. She noticed a cut on his hand from his fall and gently began to clean it. It was at this precise moment that their fragile sanctuary was shattered by new voices, dripping with scorn. Oh, for God's sake, Marcus, look! The little waitress is playing Florence Nightingale with the bum! Mia's head snapped up. Marcus and Isabella Thorne stood at the entrance to the alley, pointing, their faces masks of cruel amusement. They had apparently been waiting for their car and had wandered over to see what the commotion was. What is she doing? Isabella sneered, her voice loud enough to echo off the brick walls. Is she bowing to it? How pathetic. She probably thinks he's got a bottle of cheap wine hidden somewhere, Marcus added, with a booming, artificial laugh. Sweetheart, he called out to Mia, his voice oozing condescension. You're wasting your time. The only thing you're going to get from him is a disease. A white-hot surge of protective rage, an emotion Mia hadn't felt in years, coursed through her. She rose to her feet, instinctively placing herself between the sneering couple and the slumped Mr. Takahashi. He's sick, you monsters, she spat, her voice trembling but fierce. He's a human being. He needs help. What is wrong with you people? Marcus Thorne's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, menacing glare. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you, sweetheart? Wallowing in the garbage with that. You're just as bad as he is. You're both trash, ruining the view. She obviously is trash, Isabella chimed in, looking Mia up and down with disdain. Look at that coat, probably from the same thrift store as his suit. The casual, profound cruelty of it stole Mia's breath. But before she could form a response, another sound sliced through the alley's foul air. It was the quiet, authoritative hum of a powerful engine. A black Maybach, as sleek and silent as a panther, glided to a sudden stop in the middle of the street, eliciting a chorus of angry honks from the taxis behind it. The rear door flew open. A man in an immaculate, razor-sharp suit, Kenjiro's chief of staff, Mr. Ito, leaped out, his face a mask of controlled panic. Mr. Takahashi! Sir! Ito shouted, spotting his employer in the alley. He had been tracking Kenjiro via a tiny GPS chip sewn into the cheap suit, a security measure Kenjiro detested but had been forced to accept. When the signal had stopped moving for over 30 minutes, Ito had initiated emergency protocols. Ito and two large security men sprinted into the alley, their movements swift and purposeful. They pushed past the stunned, gaping figures of Marcus and Isabella Thorne as if they were statues. "Sir, are you all right? We are getting you to the hospital immediately," Ito said, his voice a frantic but respectful mix of English and Japanese. He and one of the guards gently and expertly lifted Mr. Takahashi to his feet, and then the world shifted on its axis. Bolstered by adrenaline, by the arrival of his people, and most of all by Mia's act of kindness, Kenjiro Takahashi stood. He was weak, leaning heavily on Ito, but his eyes were no longer dull with pain. They were blazing with a cold, clear fire. He looked at Mia, and for a fleeting second, all the immense power he wielded was visible in his gaze. He gave her a short, deep, and profoundly respectful bow. "You saved my life," he said in perfect Japanese. Then he turned. He slowly, deliberately, looked at the three stunned, silent figures at the mouth of the alley. Marcus Thorne's arrogant, florid face had turned the color of ash. His jaw hung slack. He knew that car. He knew that face. He'd seen it on the cover of Forbes just last month. He was looking at Kenjiro Takahashi, the man he had dismissed as it, the man who held the fate of his company, his entire future, in the palm of his hand. Kenjiro's gaze locked onto Thorne. He lifted a trembling finger and pointed. His voice, when it came, was no longer slurred. It was quiet, raspy, but it carried the chilling weight of absolute authority. He spoke in perfect, unaccented English. "Mr. Ito." "Yes, sir." "The meeting scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow with this man?" He gestured to the petrified Thorne. "Yes, sir. The Thorne development proposal," Ito replied, his face a placid mask, though he understood precisely what was unfolding. "Cancel it," Kenjiro said. Thorne made a small, strangled noise, like a dying animal. Mr. Takahashi, I didn't realize." Kenjiro's eyes were like chips of obsidian. "You saw a man in distress and you kicked him." He shifted his gaze to Isabella, who looked as if she'd seen a ghost. "And you took a photograph." His eyes returned to Marcus Thorne. "My $2 billion Hana Foundation. Your development was to be a cornerstone partner." "Was," Ito echoed, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Mr. Thorne," Kenjiro Takahashi said, as his team began to guide him toward the waiting Maybach. "You are not merely a bad businessman. You are a bad human being. And I will not build a legacy to my wife on a foundation of cruelty. You are finished." Marcus Thorne's expensive smartphone, the one he used to command his own small empire, slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the concrete. Kenjiro was helped into the car, but before Ito could close the door, he looked back at Mia. She was standing frozen in the filthy alley, still holding the damp cloth. "You," Kenjiro called out. "Waitress, what is your name?" "Mia," she stammered. "Amelia Evans, sir." He nodded, a look of profound, unreadable intensity on his face. "Amelia Evans," he said, the name a solemn pronouncement. "We are not finished." The heavy door of the Maybach closed with a silent, expensive thud. The car merged seamlessly into traffic and vanished, leaving Mia alone in the alley with three people whose lives had just been utterly and irrevocably dismantled. The next day was a surreal fog. Mia gave a brief statement to the paramedics who eventually arrived, rode the bus home in a daze, and fell into a fitful sleep punctuated by dreams of roaring Maybachs and sneering faces. She woke up convinced it had all been a bizarre, stress-induced hallucination. A secret Japanese billionaire, a public takedown, a scene from a movie played out in a garbage-strewn alley. It was too fantastic to be real. She got up at 8, put on her nursery uniform of jeans and a fleece, and went to work, the world stubbornly refusing to change. The mulch was heavy, the customers were demanding, and the math of her life still refused to add up. Around 3 Canto p.m., as she was wrestling a large potted ficus onto a customer's cart, a sleek black car, different from the Maybach but no less imposing, pulled into the nursery's gravel lot. The man who emerged was Mr. Ito. He wore another flawless suit, this one a deep charcoal grey, and looked as out of place among the bags of peat moss as an orchid in a field of dandelions. Her boss, a grizzled man named Dave, stared, his mouth agape. "Mia, someone in a penguin suit is here for you." Mia's heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She wiped her dirt-stained hands on her jeans and walked toward him. Mr. Ito offered a slight, formal bow. "Miss Evans, I trust you are well." Yes. Is Mr. Takahashi okay?" "He is recovering at home. Thank you for asking," Ito said, his expression unreadable. "The doctors have given him a clean bill of health. He is extremely grateful." He paused, his sharp eyes taking in her work-stained clothes, the exhaustion on her face, the whole weary picture of her life. "Mr. Takahashi is a man who believes that all debts must be paid. He has sent this as a token of his appreciation for your timely assistance." He produced a thick, cream-colored envelope from his inner jacket pocket and held it out to her. It felt heavy, substantial. Mia looked at the envelope, then back at Ito's impassive face. A token, a payment, a transaction, and a flicker of the same protective fire she'd felt in the alley ignited within her. Guided by an instinct she didn't know she possessed, she shook her head, keeping her dirty hands clasped behind her back. "I can't accept that," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Ito's eyebrow arched, a minuscule but significant sign of genuine surprise. "I assure you, Miss Evans, it is a considerable sum. It would be most helpful to you." His gaze flickered toward the run-down nursery office, a subtle but clear acknowledgement that he knew she was struggling. He had run a background check. He knew everything. "I didn't help him for money," Mia said, her voice gaining strength. "I helped him because he was sick, because he was a person, because he was alone and scared, and people were being cruel to him." A flush of anger rose in her cheeks. "Does he think I'm like them? Does Mr. Takahashi think I only do things if there's a profit to be made?" For the first time, a genuine smile touched Mr. Ito's lips. It transformed his severe face, making him look younger, more human. "No," he said, and the single word was filled with warmth. "He was hoping you would say that." He retracted the envelope, and from a different pocket produced a simple, slim white one. "This," Ito said, gesturing with the first envelope, "was a test. It contains $50,000 in cash. Had you accepted it, my instructions were to thank you for your service and depart. Mr. Takahashi would have considered his debt settled, and you would never have heard from us again." Mia felt a wave of dizziness. $50,000. It was more money than she had ever seen. It was a year of her mother's care. It was a down payment on a life without constant, suffocating fear. Her hands began to tremble. "But since you refused," Ito continued, his voice softening, "my instructions are to give you this instead." He handed her the second, slimmer envelope. Inside there was no cash. There was only a single, heavy-stock business card. It was embossed with the silver camellia blossom. Below it, a handwritten address, the penthouse of the Takahashi Tower, and a time, 11:00 a.m., the next day. "Mr. Takahashi has formally requested a meeting with you, Miss Evans," Ito said. "He does not wish to reward your kindness. He wishes to understand it, and he wishes to discuss your future." My future? You are, if I may be so bold, spectacularly overqualified to be wrestling with ficus trees, Ito said with a wry glance at the plant. We are aware of your academic background, your focus on Japanese landscape design, your grandfather's influence, your mother's illness. He straightened his tie. Mr. Takahashi was particularly moved by your family's situation. A car will be waiting for you outside your home at 10:30 a.m. tomorrow. I would strongly advise you to be in it. He gave another crisp bow, turned, and walked back to his car, leaving Mia standing in a cloud of gravel dust, holding a small card that felt heavier than the world. The private elevator ascended 95 floors in a state of unnerving, absolute silence. Mia felt her ears pop as she was lifted out of the world of noise and struggle and into the serene, rarefied air of the stratosphere. The doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into the penthouse itself, and the view snatched the breath from her lungs. It was not an apartment. It was a sky-born sanctuary. The entire floor was a single, cavernous space, with walls of seamless glass that offered a god's-eye panorama of Chicago and the vast, glittering expanse of Lake Michigan. The city she knew, a messy, loud, intimate tangle of streets and neighborhoods, was transformed into a silent, beautiful, intricate map. The sun was bright, the sky a piercing blue. The penthouse itself was a masterpiece of minimalist Japanese aesthetics. Polished slate floors, a few priceless scrolls on the rare solid walls, and in the center of the room, a magnificent, ancient bonsai pine, its gnarled branches a testament to centuries of patient cultivation. And standing by the window, looking down upon his city, was Kenjiro Takahashi. He was not the broken creature from the alley. He wore a simple but elegant yukata of dark indigo silk. His posture was erect, his presence radiating a quiet, immense power that filled the vast space. He turned, and his face was calm, his eyes clear, sharp, and surprisingly kind. "Miss Evans, Amelia, please come in." His English was flawless, tinged with a formal, musical cadence. "Mr. Takahashi," Mia said, her voice barely a whisper, I'm so glad to see you're looking well." "I am well because of you," he said simply, gesturing to a low table set with 2 cushions on the floor. "Please, sit." Mia sat awkwardly, unused to sitting on the floor in her one good dress, a simple navy blue sheath she'd bought for a wedding years ago. A woman in a traditional kimono, who seemed to materialize from the shadows, performed a silent, graceful tea ceremony, placing a simple, rough-hewn ceramic bowl before each of them. The woman bowed and vanished as silently as she had appeared. Mia looked at her bowl. It was beautiful, but flawed. A jagged, brilliant line of gold lacquer ran down one side, binding 2 pieces of the bowl together. "Kintsugi." "The doctors were very clear," Kenjiro began, his voice quiet but resonant. "I was not merely unwell. I was in the final, critical moments before a catastrophic stroke. Another 10 minutes, perhaps even 5, and the man you see before you would be a memory, or worse, a mindless shell. You did not just save my dignity, Amelia. You saved my life." I just did what anyone would have done," Mia stammered, the words feeling hollow and inadequate in the silent room. Kenjiro's kind expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "No," he said, his voice cutting through the air with precision. "That is the precise, devastating point. I lay on that sidewalk for nearly an hour. Hundreds of people passed me. Anyone didn't do what you did." He leaned forward, and the titan of industry was back. "Do you know who anyone is, Amelia? Anyone is Marcus Thorne, a man who has been petitioning my company for $1 billion partnership for over a year. He looked me in the eye as I was dying and told me to get away from him. Anyone is his wife who saw a human being in agony and used it as a backdrop for a social media post. He shook his head, a look of profound, cold sorrow on his face. And anyone is Gregory, the doorman, a man paid to provide service and security, who saw suffering and decided it was garbage to be disposed of. He kicked me, Miss Evans. He dragged me into the filth. That's horrible, Mia whispered, stunned. It is the truth, Kenjiro said. I have been a wealthy man for a very long time. Wealth is a fortress, but it is also a prison. It surrounds you with mirrors, people who only reflect what they think you want to see. My wife, Hana, she was the last person who saw me, not the Takahashi name. She has been gone for 10 years. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of that decade. I perform those walks to remind myself of the real world, to see if the world Hana believed in still exists. For years I found only greed, fear, and contempt. I had begun to believe that was all that was left. He paused, sipping his tea. I was on that street to test a theory. I was preparing to launch a $2 billion foundation in Hana's name, to build gardens and parks, places of serenity. But I feared I was planting a garden in dead soil. I believed this city, this world had no soul left to save. And now? Mia asked, her heart pounding. And now I know I was right, Kenjiro said, a sad smile touching his lips. The city is a machine. The Thorns and the Gregorys are the rule, not the exception. They are the gears that grind people down. He took another sip of tea. But such gears can be broken. Mr. Thorne's meeting was, as I said, cancelled. So was every line of credit he held with any financial institution in which I have an interest. His company filed for bankruptcy this morning. He is ruined. The photograph his wife posted became evidence. Their family's social standing is built on a carefully curated image of philanthropy. I made 2 phone calls, one to the chairman of the museum board, another to the head of the city's largest charity gala. I described what I saw. I believe the words disgusting and inhuman were used. They have been socially and financially exiled. Mia felt a chill. The power was absolute, the justice swift and terrifying. And Gregory, the doorman? He was the most honest of them, Kenjiro said. He was not greedy, just cruel in his small way. He was fired, of course. He will find that his particular brand of service is no longer in demand. He will now learn what it truly means to be invisible. He set his tea bowl down, seeing the conflict on Mia's face. This is not vengeance, Amelia. It is rebalancing the scales. But it is not the point. They are the old world. I am interested in building a new one. He picked up his kintsugi tea bowl. You know what this is. Mia nodded, her academic knowledge a small, solid island in a sea of overwhelming emotions. It's kintsugi, the art of mending broken pottery with gold, the belief that the object is more beautiful for having been broken. A genuine, brilliant smile lit up Kenjiro's face. Yes, this very bowl was shattered by my great-grandfather in a moment of anger 400 years ago. It was worthless. But the master who repaired it didn't hide the damage. He illuminated it. He made the break the most beautiful part of the piece. It is now the most valuable object I own. He placed the bowl on the table between them. 2 days ago, I was that broken bowl. My body was shattered, yes. But more importantly, my spirit, my faith in humanity. It was in pieces. He looked her directly in the eye, his gaze intense and unblinking. And then you came. You, with your own exhaustion, your own struggles. Oh yes, I know about your mother, about the nursery, about the crushing weight you carry every day. You knelt in the garbage, and you did not see trash. You saw a person. You saw the flower Hana made. You spoke to me in my own language. His voice thickened with emotion. In that moment, Amelia, you were the gold. Mia was speechless, tears brimming in her eyes. I asked myself, why? Why did you do it? You didn't know who I was. There was no reward. You had nothing to gain. This was the real question. Mia took a deep, shaky breath, the tired waitress and the passionate horticulturalist finally merging into one. Because I've spent my life studying not just plants, but a philosophy, she said, her voice trembling but clear. The idea that everything has a spirit, a kami, that there is beauty in imperfection, in resilience. She thought of her mother, of the slow, heart-breaking erosion of her mind, but the stubborn, beautiful persistence of her spirit. I watch my mother fight a disease that breaks her a little more each day. But she isn't less. In some ways, she's more. Her spirit shines brightest at the breaks. When I saw you, I didn't see garbage. I saw someone who was broken. And I guess I had a little gold to share. That's all. Kenjiro stared at her for a long, silent minute. The only sound the faint, distant hum of the city far below. A little gold, he repeated, savoring the phrase. No, Amelia. A treasure. He stood and walked back to the window. I told you I have a $2 billion problem. I have this immense resource that I must use for good, but I cannot give it to the thorns of the world. I cannot give it to people who build more walls. I need a new architect, someone who understands how to mend what is broken. He turned to face her. I am not offering you a reward, Miss Evans. I am offering you a mission. I am dissolving my plans to donate to the established foundations. They are part of the machine. Instead, I am creating the Hana Takahashi Foundation, and I want you to run it. The world tilted on its axis. What? Run? Run it? Mr. Takahashi, I'm a waitress. I work at a nursery. You were a waitress, he corrected her, a sharp edge to his voice. Do not ever diminish who you are. Do you think I need another soulless MBA from Wharton to manage this? I have armies of them. They understand leverage and returns. They understand nothing of kintsugi. I am not hiring your resume, Amelia. I am hiring your character. I can teach you how to manage a fund. I cannot teach you how to have a heart. I cannot teach you to kneel in the filth. You already know how. A $2 billion foundation. She couldn't process the number. It was just a sound, an abstraction. This is too much, she whispered, her hands trembling. I can't. You can, he said simply, but not while you are trapped by the old world. He walked to a sleek, minimalist desk and picked up a single white envelope. As of 9 o'clock this morning, my family office has settled in full every outstanding medical and personal debt belonging to you and your parents. Your mother's care has been permanently endowed at the finest neurological institute in the country. You are free. This was the blow she could not withstand. Not the job offer, not the incomprehensible sum of money. This, the freedom, the crushing, suffocating weight of fear and debt she had carried for 3 years, the relentless math, the slow-motion drowning. In a single sentence, it evaporated. It was gone. Mia didn't cry. She sobbed, a raw, ragged, animal sound of pure, agonizing release. It was the sound of a prisoner stepping into the sunlight for the first time. She hunched over, hiding her face, mortified by the raw, uncontrollable display. Kenjiro did not move. He did not patronize her with a comforting touch. He simply waited, respectfully, granting her the dignity of her own catharsis. After a long minute, she wiped her face and composed herself. She stood up, her legs wobbly, but her back straight. She was no longer the tired waitress, the indebted daughter. She was just Amelia. She looked at the most powerful man she had ever met. What do I do first? Kenjiro Takahashi smiled, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. He walked her to the vast window, the city lights beginning to glitter like a sea of scattered diamonds below them. You tell me, he said. You were the one on the ground. You know where the cracks are. He went back to the table, picked up the priceless kintsugi tea bowl, and placed it gently in her hands. Go, he said. Find them, and fill them with gold. 1 year later, Amelia Evans stood on a newly constructed rooftop garden overlooking one of Chicago's most neglected neighborhoods. It was the grand opening of the first Hana Takahashi Serenity Garden, a breathtaking public space with tranquil walking paths, a traditional Japanese tea house, and hundreds of camellia bushes. She was no longer the weary woman in a cheap coat. She wore a simple, elegant suit, her posture confident, her eyes bright with purpose. Kenjiro Takahashi sat in the front row, his face a mask of quiet, profound joy. Kindness, Meir said to the assembled crowd of community members and press, is not a transaction. It's not something we do in hope of a reward. It is the fundamental material of our shared humanity. It is the gold we use to mend our world, one broken piece at a time. After the ceremony, as she was leaving, she noticed a man working with the landscaping crew, carefully laying sod. He was broad-shouldered, his face weathered and humbled by hard work. He looked up, and their eyes met. It was Gregory, the former doorman. After being fired and blacklisted, he had been unemployed for months before finding work with a small landscaping contractor, a contractor the foundation had specifically chosen for the project. He recognized Mia instantly. A deep, painful flush of shame rose in his face, and he quickly looked away. Mia paused. She walked over to the crew foreman and whispered something to him. The foreman nodded and clapped Gregory on the shoulder, pointing him toward a different task, one with more responsibility. Gregory looked over at Mia, who was now getting into her car. He couldn't speak, but his eyes were filled with a dazed, questioning gratitude. Mia simply looked at him, gave a small, polite nod, and was driven away. She felt no triumph, no pity, not even forgiveness. She just saw a broken piece, and a world that was waiting to be mended.